Oops.
JavaScript. I'm up to a 76.
Oh, looking at pretty things. Less pretty, hard to compete. That's still cool. You guys are learning all this cool stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
Let's keep learning more about Windows Forms. Use all these different pieces of knowledge together. We looked last week at the code, how you can connect these things on your Windows Forms to your other pieces of code. Remember how you do it. This is one of those things where people will have it, and then they'll just look at me with that blank stare and be like, I don't remember. So remember, we're going to always be looking at in our code, if we're looking at a form control, we'll be looking at code that refers to the control name followed by the control property, separated with a dot, and then some sort of value to set the property. So in this example, label 1 is the name of our control on the form. The property we want to update is the visible property. Remember, the property identifier requires the control name along with it. We can't just say .visible equals true. We have to make sure we're specifying label 1's visible property. And those different parts are separated by the period or the dot. And then after the equal sign, we would set the new property's value. We're looking at Boolean properties here. We can use them in an if statement. We saw that last week a lot. Here we're saying if the label 1 property visible is true, right? We're implying that true word because it's a Boolean. We want to set it to false otherwise. We want to set it to true. Now we could do something else on this one that is a little neat. We could say label 1 being the worst possible variable name for this example. We could set it equal to not label 1 dot visible. So notice that that would set it to the opposite. So if it were true, it would set it to false. If it were false, it would set it to true. So think about it. It's a pretty handy way for us to reverse a value if we're looking at a Boolean like that. We're going to do this kind of code often when we're working with forms, where we are just checking things and changing things. When we're working with strings, we've seen that a lot of our controls on forms have a .text property, and that .text property is a string, and that string is usually what's used to display for that control on the form. So if you're having trouble and you're getting some sort of weird error, make sure you have the .text property specified in your line of code if that's what you're indeed wanting to work with. So that's a very common mistake, is for people to say, I want to set text bx name equal to nothing and leave out the .text property. And it'll give you kind of a weird error. So just remember, you've always got to specify that property name. In this example, we're saying that if the picture box 1 control is clicked, we would like to run this event procedure. Remember, that's not going to be known by Windows unless we've wired this event procedure to that picture box control on the form, right, using our events capability. Now, in this event procedure, if the picture box 1 is clicked, We'd like to allocate a string named save data. We'd like to save the text box names text value into that save data variable, and then clear the text box names text property. So very, very easy for us to do. We just have to remember that we specify the control name followed by the property name. When we started working with C# classes just a few weeks ago, properties were something that were kind of hurled right at you, and it's like, what? Well, we now know that properties are the things that are exposed by our class to other classes. Same way when we're looking at a form control. All of these properties, like the text property and the visible property, are properties for this form control object. So we can get those values just by setting a variable equal to that control.property, like textboxnames.text, or numeric up down, excuse me, how many dot value. And then if we want to update that property's value, we would just update it like we would any other variable by setting its name before the equal sign. So if we want to update the form1.text property to the value of hello world, we would say form1.text equal hello world. So it's just that easy. So I love it when I show it to you and you're like, duh, good. Remember it when you are trying to code it. Now, common conventions. Our form controls are normally added to the form by the developer. Form control names are usually in lowercase. So txt, starting with a lowercase t. Form control names usually start with an identifying prefix. We've seen that so far. We've named things txt if they're text boxes, btn for button, just some sort of prefix like that that categorizes our control. We always want to name controls that are going to be accessed in the code. We'll see that sometimes if we're using really advanced controls that we'll only have one of, like a menu across the top of our form, we might not rename it. Depends on how our conventions are, what we're working with. Now, whenever we're working with control properties, these are items that have predetermined names. So these are like our property values, like .text. So we always want to make sure that we're using those common conventions. Whenever you're turning assignments in and you're using Windows Forms, some of those things are included in our rubric where it says that you followed all naming conventions and things like that, because your code will be really hard to follow if you have label 1 or txt1, txt2, txt3. So those are the kind of habits that we don't want to develop. We want to make sure that we're naming things properly. So last week we were kind of focused on chapter 9 in our handy dandy PDF document. And this week we're kind of focused on chapter 10. So these are, it won't come over here for me. These are the chapters where your test bank questions will come from, not from that new book at all. So just totally chapter 9 and 10 here from this book. But if you notice, chapter 9 was pretty short, just a quick intro. So we kind of moved into some chapter 10 content last week because we were looking at our checkboxes and radio buttons because our assignment was ready for you guys to have access to those. So let's work today on just a quick example so that we can get a little bit more practice and a little bit more experience. With Windows Forms, it can be hard to work with others when you're working with your form especially, because you get kind of artistic and we don't really have a lot of code separated right now. Let's look at our pizza delivery app that's this week's assignment. I jumped to Canvas. I mentioned that because I'd love to make this a group assignment, but I just don't think it would work well because you guys would be stepping on each other's toes. So let's take a look at it. This assignment you're not quite ready to get started on yet. So don't jump right into it until we've talked a little bit about some of these different controls that you're going to need to use. This is going to be a pizza delivery project. It is presented by our textbook at the end of the chapter. So whether you look at that example or not, it's kind of up to you. What we want to do is use some tab controls. So in this example, they have a tab for pizza, a tab for beverages, where they ask them, how much pop they want, and then a tab that has a drop-down list of specialty items, like wings and garlic bread and things like that. So you need some tabs, tab control. It says that it would be nice if it had some pictures and was nicely graphical, visually appealing. So we can do that with our tabs. So that's kind of what we'll be working towards as we look at our examples today and next time, making sure that you have all the resources necessary to know how to go about doing this one. So let's start with a little example that will get us headed in that direction. I'm going to open Visual Studio, and we're going to be working with a club. So I'm going to create a new project, and I want to make sure that this is set as a Windows Forms app. And I'm going to call it Chapter 10 Club Form App. So in our club, we're just going to have some activities that people can do, like a list of them. And we're going to allow people to add to that list if they have other activities they'd like to do. And then we'll have a checkbox of some locations and radio buttons of their traveling method, so that we can build an overall message displaying what they've done or what they want to do in our club. So let's see how we can utilize some controls. We just like to try some. Now, looking at my form, I'd like to go ahead and set some defaults. Take it a second there for those properties to come up. So if I look at my form properties, I'll change my text property first, and this is going to be like a club activity list. And I want to change my back color . Let's see, I haven't chosen much blue. And I'll change my fore color, kind of match. Super light, and I want my font to be a little bigger. And we'll look at this other one here. So we're going to list all of these events that people can do, and then down at the bottom we're going to have a message that displays an overall summary. Let's go ahead and set that at our text box that's going to display our summary information across the bottom. I'm going to use a text box control for that. We could use a label if we wanted to. Remember, a text box control gives us a little bit more control over how we size it. And I want it to be kind of down here at the bottom of my form, or maybe move it down to the very bottom. If I wanted to, I could anchor it. So if you look at the anchor control on your text box, I could anchor it to the bottom of my form. Right now it's sort of anchored to the bottom and to the right. I'll go ahead and stick it to the left too. Now if somebody resizes my form, it'll stay stuck or anchored to those sides. Now I want to rename my text box before I get any further. You'll see that our PDF document kind of wanders around. Sometimes they name their text boxes TXT and sometimes TXTBX. Let's use TXTBX because it seems to emphasize that it's the control on our form versus the property, the text property, so we can get them confused, especially when we're talking. So this text box down here, let's call it TXTBX result. It's going to contain all of our messages that we have to the user. So we don't really want them to type anything in here. So let's change the read only to true. I'm going to run this and see how it behaves. And it's not going to behave exactly the way it will when there's other controls because this is the only one. But notice how the cursor will still go there. We work on that. But one thing that I'd like to do is change the enabled property. Let's see what happens if we change enabled from true to false. Now let's run that. So notice how our cursor won't get stuck in that text box at all. Because it's a text box, it'll still be visible. It's just not an enabled control for the user to interact with. So all our different properties work together there. All right, so I'm going to put a little label above that that identifies that as our result. So very small, and I'll say in our text property, result. And you can set that wherever you want. Now for our club, this is kind of our activity, our outing. So we want to pick what kind of transportation we're going to use to go on this outing. So let's create a group box. Where would I find that group box this early Monday morning? Containers. So let's put one on here. And this group box, I want the text to say transportation. And I'm going to go change my for color since it's being weird. And for transportation, let's give them 4 options. We're going to have walking, airplane, driving, and train. So we want to use radio buttons for those because we can only choose one choice. So let's find our radio button control. And we want this to be walking. So we're going to set our text property to say walking. And then we're going to name this RAD, walking. And if we keep everything pretty consistent like that, it's going to make our lives a lot easier, right? Now we want another radio button. This one is going to be airplane. Let's say flying. Airplane does not really go well with walking. We'll say flying, and we'll make it RAD flying. Then driving. RAD, driving. And finally, train. Can't make that the right text or person or whatever it is. Training. We'll just say by train. And then I'm going to name it RAD by train. Without a typo. Now for our trip here, let's see if we can get some things going on with this. I'd like to run it and make sure everything's looking okay. We don't have any errors. You know, all our radio buttons are within our group box the way we'd like. Last week we saw this where some people's first radio button was already pre-selected and other people's second was. There's been a little bit of research since then, and we found that it's because our radio buttons are the first thing on the form that can be tabbed to. So let's see if we could fix that. I'm going to move this down a little bit, and I think I'm going to add a label. And let's call this, let's just prompt for the name of the event or the name of the activity. And then we'll put a text box with that. And I'm going to name this text box TXT BX name of activity. So it's going to have a very long name. Now I want to run my application again.
What do you call it?
TXT BX name of activity.
Thank you, sorry.
It's all right. It's really long. Get it? Now, I said that tab, the first tab item is what's being checked automatically in our radio buttons. So it still is happening even though I added this text box. Well, that's because our tab order has already been set. So let's go look at that. Have you ever used a form or a website where when you press tab, it jumps around and you can't figure out where your cursor went? So it goes from city, you know, back to your address and then address line 7 and stuff. Well, we want to make sure we don't do that to people. And we have complete control over it. So if I click on my name of activity text box, find your tab control items, and you have a few. Basically, you have tab stop, which means does the tab key stop here or does it just fly on by? And then we have tab index. Now tab index is the order. So right now my text box is set to be the 4th thing. That makes sense because tab index starts at 0. And my radio buttons I put on the form first. So walking, if I click on it, I'll see it's tab index 0. That's why it's getting selected. Flying is tab index 1. I want to fix this. So I'm going to click on my name of activity and make it be tab index 0. Now I can run and see what my tab index is like, or I could click on all my different controls in my form. That would be best, of course, because I could fix it. but I want to go ahead and run it and let's see what happens. Now I've got my cursor sitting there at my name of activity text box where I want it. So it has the focus. That's the current form control. If I press tab, it goes to walking, flying. Oh, wait, it's jumping around. That's all right. It's because it's within that radio or that group control. So once I got within that group control, I would have to press the down arrow to move around. But we can see our tab control is working more appropriately now. Okay, so let's stop. So be aware of that tab index, the order the tab key is going to move around the form so that you can control it and make it work properly. Okay, the next thing we want to know about this activity is, do they have any special options for lodging that we can offer to our members? So let's create another group box. And this is going to be group lodging options. And all I need to change is my text property. And I'll fix my fore color. So the things that we are interested in, we're going to put in checkboxes. So we would like to know if there is an in-room shower. So let's put in our text property, in-room shower. And we are going to name that CHK in-room shower. Next, we'd like to know if there are same-sex rooms. Some people don't feel comfortable. So let's name that CHK, same-sex room. And then in our text property, we will make it say same-sex room. And then the last thing that we're going to be concerned about is bedding. So if we're staying at a hostel or something, we might need to bring our own, but they might offer it. So we'll put that in our text property, is there bedding? And we'll name that CHK bedding. So far, we have enough information. We could probably build a message. Let's take a look at when we would want that to happen. Not really quite there, are we? We could have a message like sort of display. If they click on transportation, we could say name of activity will travel, by walking or something. And then we could add in these other things as they get checked. So let's try it. So let's double click on our walking radio button. Try to zoom in a little bit. Finally let me. When we start working with our forms, it can be really easy to forget about our documentation. So let's not do that. I guess I'll just put app here instead of class. How's that? Try to be realistic. And then you. Bless you. Bless you. So this will just develop club activities. Basically, whenever we work with a class, we saw that any variables that we declare within our class, outside of any methods or anything, those are class level variables and they're kind of global to that class, right? We can access them from any methods. Well, our form is that way. Any controls that we put on our form are basically class level or global variables. So that's nice for us. We can access them in any of our methods. So in our RAD walking check changed, we can get to our text result variable. We can get to all of those different variables or controls that we have on our form. So we could update it. Let's see, if RAD walking is checked, then let's build our output text box result. We'll say that it's going to start with our text box name of activity dot text, right? We want that to be in it. And then we want to add some more. Let's add a space. And then for this one, we're going to have, for this activity, we'll say travel by foot. Now that's for if the RAD walking is checked. Let's copy that. And we'll make it an else if. With flying. We'll say travel by air. Else if we're driving. Travel by car. I'm going to put another else if for our RAD train and say travel by train. And then let's do one final else. And in this one, I made that RAD by train. In our final else, let's display the name of the activity, and then in the result, put something like select mode of travel. We know we should never be able to get to this else, right? Because these radio buttons imply that one has to be selected for us to get to this. Now, I said this was our RAD walking check changed, and then I kind of made it into all of them. So we'll need to make this event apply to all of our radio buttons. But let's test it out first for our walking. Right now, it should only work for the walking radio button since that's the only one it's wired to. So I'm going to run I'll put in some sort of name. This is the name. And I'll choose walking. And there's my activity name, and it says we're going to travel by foot. Does everybody see something there? You're getting something out on your result?
I get a bill there.
You get a bill there.
Basically, the
Check and see why it's working.
says select mode.
Okay, I'm going to make it really mad. Are you ready? Let's save all because we're going to make it really mad. I want to rename that event procedure that we made. Let's save everything, and then let's rename it. So I want this to be RAD transportation, check changed, instead of walking. Because I want this to be used for all of my radio buttons. Because I just put this if statement in that handles all of them. So once we rename it, we're going to get an error down here, and it's going to be one of those errors that is going to make our form really angry. So let's go try to change those event procedure wirings in our form, and we'll see we can't. So let's go to our code and delete this, or we could make it RAD transportation. And it's showing us that suggestion in the IntelliSense. So we can delete that action, that association. By deleting that line of code and then using the GUI controls. So that's what I want to do to add that association to our other radio buttons. Let's go back to our form. Select flying, driving, and by train. And then in your properties dialog box, we want to choose the events. And in our checked changed event, we want to use our RAD transportation checked changed. So we could have, remember, a really short little event for each one of these, or we can have the one event procedure that we use for all of them. So either way is fine. If you look at the example code that you can download for this week's example that is somewhat like this application, you'll see it approaches it using a separate event procedure for each radio button, and that's fine. But now I'm ready to test and make sure that it's working properly for all of them. So let's try it. I get my walking message, flying, driving, and by train.
All right.
Is that okay? Look good? Look good? Is it working?
I'm still kind of having problems.
What's the matter?
If you say yes, you're ready to go. Oh, so you have to say yes. Now, since you're here. Oh, okay.
Okay, so let's make our lodging stuff work. We'll be kind of simple with it too. So let's just say if somebody checks these, we're going to add them to our result saying these are available options. So I'm going to set up the output for the in-room shower. So we don't know what our result of our text box is so far. So we could do all of these same things again. Seems like we'll just update it with whatever is already there. So txt box result dot text plus equal. Oh, I need some if statements. I'm just going ahead without even checking to see where I am. So if chk bedding dot checked get myself situated here. I think I'll say bedding is supplied. Now I started that with a space, but we're definitely going to have to do some cleaning up here to get everything to work properly. I want to run it and see what happens now. Oops. I've got my check in-room shower and I'm doing my check bedding. Would that work the way I want it to? Let's run it and see, because it's a really common mistake and I want you to kind of think about what's going on there. Here's my text box. We'll say they're driving. Now I put that event procedure on my in-room shower. I'm not seeing any update of anything. It doesn't seem to be working at all. Why is that? Do I? Right, the leftover stuff. So in our checkbox, that checkbox that I created the event procedure for is named check in-room shower. So that's when this thing is going to execute, right? When somebody checks or unchecks that one. Within the event procedure, I said, if check bedding is checked. Well, that's not making any sense, is it? Now, the only way I'm going to get any sort of results is if I check bedding and then check the in-room shower. And then I'll get my bedding is supplied message. Because I have a bug in my program, right? That's not really what I wanted to do. What I want to do in my check in-room shower is check the check in-room shower. And I'll say in-room shower is available. Now, if I'm going to do a separate event procedure for each of those checkboxes, I'll go back to my form and double click my same-sex room, and I'll say if CHK same-sex room dot checked, then I want to update that text box result. Same-sex room is an option. So let's run. Now my first two checkboxes should work properly, or at least the way I have them set up. In-room shower shows in-room shower is available. Same-sex room shows same-sex room is an option. Now, if we uncheck them, that message isn't going away. Right? So we are starting to see some of the issues that could go along with us doing all of these different event procedures, right? Because we're getting a lot of things going on here. Let's put our bedding in. And then if our CHK bedding is checked, we want to set our text box result in room where bedding is available. Okay, so we see now that we have messages kind of going all over the place, right? Here's our activity name. And if I do things properly and I type the activity name, and then I check what type of transportation we want, and then I check an option, our message looks pretty good. says activity name, travel by air, same-sex room is an option. So it's not looking too bad. But it's when I start unchecking things or changing things and stuff, our message is not looking very good anymore, right? So maybe something we're going to need to work on. So that's something that we have in the back of our minds, knowing that there could be a flaw with our logic here of all these different event procedures. Let's add one more thing to our form so you can see how this control works. We would like a list. So we want a list of different types of activities or events that we could be using. I want to go back to my form design. And in my form design, I'm going to find the list box. Let me make sure it's a list box. Yep. So my list box control is kind of going to let me create a list. So let's drag it onto our form, and I think I'll put it right under our transportation item. Now our list box is going to be our events. So maybe if I make my form just a little bit longer, I'm going to kind of move some things down. Nice thing about Windows Forms, I just rearrange a little bit. My list box a little bit lower because I want a heading for it. So for above my list box, I want a label. And this label is going to say select events. Now, right now I'm looking at my events here in my properties window. So I need to switch back to properties so I can find that text property, and change it to say select events. All right, let's work on our list box. We need to name it. And for a list box, our prefix is going to be LSTBX. And we'll call this events. So these are all the different events that people can choose from. Now, when we have a list box control, it's just basically an array on the screen. And so we can add things to this list or to this array fairly easily. We can do it at design time using the toolbox items. We can do it at runtime using .add syntax to add items to our list. And we're going to try both here so that we know how to do it both ways. Now, to add items to our list, in our list box, we want to find the items property. The items property, if you notice, is a collection, and that means it's an array. It's a list of things. So when you click on that collections property, you'll see an ellipsis open. Click on that ellipsis, the 3 dots, and the string collection editor will open for you. This is pretty basic. It's really easy to use. You just type in the string value that you want to include in your list. So let's set up some for ours. We'd like to be able to go to an amusement park. They have a boat tour, a dance, a dinner, a hike, a movie, or a sport event. So once you've added your items in the collection editor, you can just click OK, and they should show up in your list. Now, let's make that list a little smaller. And notice the scroll bars do show up for you. I'm going to run and see what it looks like. So here's our list. Now, right now, this list, I can select one thing on that list, and that's the default. I could set it to allow multi-selection, where somebody could hold control and select a non-contiguous item, or hold the shift key and select a whole bunch in the list. I'm not going to do that with this one, but we do have that property option. Now, if you look at the list box properties, notice what other kind of options there are for you. You could set the sorted to true, and then Windows would automatically sort those items in that collection for you. You can set the scroll bar to always be visible. Our selection mode right now is what's set to 1. That's only allowing us to select one item. We could set it to multi-simple, which we wouldn't like. Multi-extended is the type of selection that we're used to with Windows. We can set up a horizontal scroll bar. We could do some other formatting to our string if we wanted to set up a pattern. We could dock this list box to one side of the form, the top or the bottom, so that it always stuck to that side.
You can do anything.
All sorts of things. Let's run it and see what it looks like. And again, looks great. All right, so what we would like to do is, if somebody selects an event, we want to add that to our result as far as what type of event this is going to be. Okay, so that's going to be our event procedure. We don't have a button associated with it. We don't have a radio button or a checkbox. We have a clicking on an item in this list. So to create that event procedure, let's double click our list. Now our list box is showing up, and it gave us the event selected index changed. That means that you changed which index was the current one. Our index being the subscript number, the index number of the array list item that they clicked on. So let's update our text box result to show that. Or we could do a message box. Let's do a message box. We haven't in this application. Message box.show. And in our message box, we just want to show which item they picked. So let's say you selected, and then we'll add more to that. We want to look at our list box events, and we want to find a property that is meaningful to us. Selected item sounds good. That should be the item that they selected. Let's try that property. So let's say we're going to display a message, you selected plus the selected item. In our message box. Let's run that. So as soon as they click on one, we get that item popping up. Okay? So we can access that selected item in our code very easily. Now let's do one more thing with our form, as we're kind of trying just to experiment with things. And I'd like to be able to add items to this list. So let's add something on our form to allow that. Let's put a label here that says add an activity. And then I'll use a text box to control or to hold the activity name. This text box will be txt bx add activity. And then let's add a button. In this button, we will name btn add. And in our text property, we'll say it says add. I want to fix my colors on it. And so all this is going to do is we're going to allow them to type an activity name here and click this add button. And when they click add, we're going to add that activity to this list. So our code, our event procedure is going to be associated with our add button. So let's double click that add button. Okay, so txt activity add dot text contains our data. We want to add it to listbx items. So our list box, oops, listbx events, not items, sorry. I always let IntelliSense tell me what those names are. So in our list box events, we want to add, but if you look right here, I don't see add is an available method. I'm seeing all these methods, all these properties, all of these extra things that I can do with list boxes, but I'm not seeing add. That's because I'm not adding to the list box directly. I'm adding to the list box items. Now, once I specify that I'm using the items property of the list box, then I do see that add method available. And what do I want to add? Well, I want to add what's in our text box, add activity.text field. It's that poor comment. So that'll do it. We're taking that text box, add activity, and we're just adding it to the items in our list box. Let's go ahead and clear out that text box. We've seen that we can do that by setting it equal to two double quotes, or we can use the clear method. What do you think we could do if we wanted to clear out that list box?
Clear method.
Clear method, exactly. Okay, let's see if that works now. Here's our activity name. I'm going to say we're flying. And we have same-sex rooms. So I'm trying to make it look like it works. We're going to do a boat tour. Now, I want to add an activity. We'll add a concert. So let's click add. And there it shows up in our list. Now, if we had set our list to be sorted, that concert would automatically be sorted in the list before our list was redisplayed. So we would have that option. Everybody working okay? Now let's stop with that one. I want to add a new form here to our solution. So what I'm going to do is add a new project. And this is going to be a Windows Forms app. And I want it to be CH10 tab form. Now our tab control is a container control. So if I drop it on the form, it's going to be kind of weird. Notice how it's not automatically sized, and it starts out with 2 tabs. So I could resize it, and if I wanted to, I could make it take up my whole form, but then I wouldn't be able to have any controls that are outside of the tab. Does that make sense? Because I might want like a next button or an OK button or something down here that you can see from all of the different pages. So let's put a button on that form. And in this button's text property, I'm going to say button from all tabs. And I'm going to name it BTN all tabs. Because it's important to me to be able to see that same button from all the different tabs. Now, another thing that I might want that I can see from all my tabs, basically literally see, is a message field like that one we were working with our last app. So I'm going to put a text box down here at the bottom, across the whole bottom, and I'll name it TXTBX status. And some of the things we changed on our status, we changed the enabled from true to false. We changed the read only from false, or we left read only as true.
What do we name it?
We named it TXTBX status. Now, in my tab page 1, if you click on that tab, notice the properties for just that tab come up. It's named tab control 1. It's kind of like a form, right? But it's not exactly. So let's see, if I go back to my original form, I could copy this transportation group box. Let's see if I can copy it to this new form. It got there. It's kind of ugly, huh? Select all my radio buttons and pick a better color for their 4 colors so that I can see them. Then I could make tab page 1 be transportation, right? And so we could make it be however we wanted it, so we can separate things out a little bit. Now, when you're working on your pizza app, you can make the application move from one tab to another automatically, so you could put a next button on there. You can do it, make them do it. Yes, sir?
How did you get 2 tabs?
It just came with 2 tabs when I put that tab control on there. Did yours not do it with 2?
I don't think I put the tab control.
Try it and see.
Okay, I got it.
And then you should be able to add more though too. Yes, sir?
What else is the names of the tabs? I can't find that.
Let's take a look. So if I'm looking at tab page 1, the name is tab control 1. So you could change it, or you might decide that that's a reasonably good name because you only have the 1 tab control.
Yeah, but it didn't work.
Didn't work?
Oh, wait, it's supposed to change the name on top.
No, the name on top would be your text property.
Oh, right, sorry.
So let's check it. Or is it? What is it?
You can just go to the tab page collection editor and paint it in there. Look under your properties.
So we want to go to our tab control. And look at our tab pages collection. And then you would be able to look at the properties for each of your tab pages. So looking at tab page 1, here's our text. We could make it say transportation. And then we could change its name. Tab transpo. I better make it say transportation to make it match. Tab page 2 then, I could make it be tab options. And then we could make its text property say group options. And have that group options checkbox show up there. Now, once you've used this collection editor to name all of your tabs and set everything up the way you want them, of course, you can add pictures and other controls within your tab control, just like it's your form. So set it up however you like. I'm going to save all there. Now the pizza application can get large, so let's take the rest of our time here as lab time to work on that so that you can get a good start with it, kind of be thinking about how you want to handle it and design. Yes, sir?
When I try to rename a tab in the tab page collection editor, and I click OK, it keeps saying property value is not valid.
Make sure you don't have a space in there.
I don't.
Can you share?
Okay.
I'm stopping mine. Okay, share with us and let's see what it's doing. Probably something that other people will run into.
If I type in the name like tab option. I click OK. Oh. Well, that didn't work.
I bet it was a space. Because when you're using all those different properties like that, it's really easy to end up with a space there in that name.
I tried it several times without a space though.
Well, I'm glad it could fix when we looked at it for you. That's probably it, that you couldn't even
Like,
see.
you can't even tell, like, if you accidentally hit the space bar when you try to log into your email, it'll think that you're putting in that.
I see.
But thank you for sharing because it can get everybody. So, okay, I'm going to end this. You guys are on